seem to all be nuclear testing.
Russia?
We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. You know, we've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
Both Russia and America have very similar nuclear capabilities. It starts off with what we call strategic weapons. These are intercontinental ballistic missiles that have multiple warheads and have an explosive capacity of maybe up to sort of 300 megatons. This is 300 or so times the size of the Hiroshima bomb. So absolutely massive. And both sides have about similar amounts. In total, both the Russians and the Americans have about 5,000 warheads. So apart from the strategic weapons, and these missiles are either in silos in the ground in continental Russia or continental USA, or in submarines that are, driving around the world. And interestingly, yesterday or overnight, Trump reminded Putin that America's most powerful nuclear submarine was off the coast of Russia, ready if Putin transgressed at all. The other element to the nuclear capabilities are what we call tactical or battlefield weapons. These are much smaller yielding, up to 10,000 kilotons, or maybe 15,000, but this is 15,000 tons of conventional explosives, so still a massive explosion. Now, these are either on missiles. The Russians have something called an Iskander missile that delivers this on cruise missiles, and the Russians just talking over the last few days about their new cruise missile, the Bunavestic, that has a capability to loiter, stay in the air for hours, if not days at a time. Similarly, the Americans have missiles, and also the Americans have bombs, free-fall bombs that are dropped from fighter jets, as do the Russians. So two types of weapon, strategic and tactical, or nuclear. The most important thing is that they are balanced. The one area or new area that the Russians have been talking about this week are what they're calling maritime drones, or if you like, nuclear torpedoes, something called the Poseidon, which the Russians have been crowing about, that can create a tsunami to flatten cities close to the coast. So that is the current position. Of course, the rhetoric at the moment is very high and pretty volatile. The Americans haven't been testing, or certainly haven't been testing overtly for the last 30 years. And that's been, a result of the peace dividend from the end of the Cold War. But I think everybody agrees now that we're now in a new Cold War that is getting hotter by the day. Now, Trump has reacted to the Russians testing their nuclear torpedo and also this new nuclear cruise missile. And basically, I think what he was saying on Air Force One last night is, I'm going to do exactly the same as the opposition are going to do. It's also in the sideline. The Chinese are actually making more warheads than anybody else. Until recently, the Chinese only had a couple of hundred warheads. They're now expected to have over 1,000 by the end of the decade and seem to keep building. The Chinese seem to think that they should be in the same position as the Americans and the Russians. So when it comes to testing, there are two elements. You need to test the vehicle that you're going to use to get that warhead to its target. So that is either an intercontinental ballistic missile, a cruise missile, or whatever other delivery is concerned. So that is a delivery mechanism, which in effect Russia has been testing, or said it's been testing. And people might remember last year, Britain tested its Trident nuclear weapon missile, and there were some issues with it. So now, no doubt, they've been testing it again. The other element is testing the warhead itself. And people will have pictures of mushroom clouds in the South Pacific. The last nuclear tests have been, certainly the Americans did, were all underground. So you didn't have that contamination and fallout and everything else. Now, what people are taking from what Trump said is he's looking to test his delivery means, missiles, not necessarily the warheads. But we shall see. But I think this is all tit for tat. It's almost like school playground bullies. You do one thing and somebody does something else. So at the moment, but really, since the Ukraine war's been going badly for the Russians, probably over the last 12 months, we've seen their rhetoric of nuclear weapons build and build and build and build. And the West has been pretty neutral and pretty ambivalent to it. But I think one of the reasons Trump said what he did over on Air Force One on his way back to the States last night is he is getting really hacked off with Putin, because Trump, this great deal maker, has told Putin he wants peace in Ukraine, told Putin to stop fighting, and Putin has really just given him a stiff two fingers. And yeah, Trump is running out of road, I think. He was the one who said he'd end the war in 24 hours. He doesn't look like he's going to do it anytime soon unless he does something demonstrative. And when 2 weeks ago, there was a suggestion the Americans were going to give hundreds, if not thousands, of Tomahawk cruise missiles to the Ukrainians, the Russians went in a flat spin, and you could feel the panic emanating from the Kremlin. Now, I expect the Kremlin think they're back on a sort of even keel, as it were, because Trump sort of slightly reined back on the Tomahawk missiles. They've flashed their nuclear sort of joker, and Trump's, come back. So it is sort of strategic rhetoric at the very, very highest level. I think it's very frightening and destabilizing for everybody else around it. But, I think it's the way that Trump and Putin operate. I don't necessarily think we're any closer to a nuclear exchange today than perhaps we were a few weeks ago. If we stand fast, the Americans and the Russians, as we mentioned, the Chinese are building warheads faster than anybody else and delivery mechanisms. And, that is a concern. Of greater concern, I think, is some of the rogue states, the the people like Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who some estimates reckon they've got, 10, 15, intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear capability. That is a huge concern. And anybody who's read the brilliant book Nuclear War by Annie Jacobsen, or if they haven't, they should read it, because the scenario there is North Korea firing a couple of ICBMs, nuclear capable, at America, and the response that happens. And that is absolutely fundamental. We discussed before the Iranian issue. We think that Trump has put to bed the Iranian nuclear program for a number of years, at least. And there are a few other rogue states that are looking at it. And let's not forget, both Pakistan and India, who are virtually at war with each other, also have nuclear weapons. So there is concern of the proliferation. Really has gone unchecked in the last few years. And now the Americans, the Russians are showing new nuclear capability, the Poseidon torpedo and this new cruise missile. Trump doesn't want to be left out, it would appear. So I think there is a real danger that we could be going back into a nuclear arms race, not just between the Russians and the Americans, but also with the Chinese and, potentially some of the rogue states who, unfortunately, are probably getting the know-how and knowledge from the Russians, who are so desperate for manpower that they got from North Korea, from conventional munitions they got from North Korea and from Iran, and are prepared to sell nuclear technology for that. So, yeah, I think we're at a tricky time at the moment, and I think nobody would. Everybody's a little bit concerned with the tyrant Putin, and also, President Trump's ambiguity and the way he changes his mind so regularly. Having those two people with their fingers on the red button, doesn't give everybody a heck of a lot of confidence. So, yeah, I think we're going into a very challenging time.